Welcome to Candid Conversations with Dr. Mayfield. This episode is sponsored by Mayfield Counseling Centers, helping you find clarity, hope, and purpose. Call us at 719-452-4803. Here's your host, Trevor Sherry.
We are so grateful that you joined us today, and this might be a new experience for some of you as you may be seeing us do this podcast. We have been working on this podcast since February of 2018, and we have loved every moment of it. This is a podcast about relationships, about conversations that we actively avoid or just forget about that are really important. I'm joined, as always, with Dr. Mark Mayfield of Mayfield Counseling Centers. He's the founder and CEO.
A little casual today.
A little bit casual today.
It's Casual Friday, right?
We're having to move a little bit from dressing for radio to dressing for camera.
Yep. I forgot we were filming today, so I just, threw on a hat. But
if you are joining us for the first time, we're so grateful for your presence here. If you are joining us as usual for you through our SoundCloud hosting or iTunes, wherever you listen to podcasts, we're grateful that you're staying with us. And don't worry, you're not going to miss out on anything by not watching the YouTube channel. We just wanted to find another way to reach more people with the information that we have and to talk about some of these conversations that are really important.
Yep. And if you like YouTube and prefer YouTube, check us out there at our YouTube channel and hit like and subscribe, and we'll see how that goes.
Absolutely. Today, we get a really exciting topic. We are talking about Dr. Mayfield's new book, which, do you have a title for the book yet?
No. I think title comes at the end of all the content.
That's
so
fair.
The book's not due until March 15th, and then we'll hash out the title. I mean, it's around the idea of suicide and self-injury for parents and how to help their kids and that kind of stuff. But
which I can see already the ears perking up. Why don't you explain a little bit more about the content of the book?
Yeah, I think we would all agree as we look at our society and kind of maybe our schools and our areas and where our kids are at, that being a teenager in this day and age is not easy, especially for kids that are maybe have a heightened sense of sensitivities, or they are struggling with some mental health issues, or maybe they're just, different in a little way, not in a bad way, but just not like the mainstream and what everybody else says that kids are supposed to look like and act like. And we're seeing suicide on the rise, especially here in Colorado. It's the second leading cause of death among 10 to 18-year-olds, which is horrific. But we don't often talk about, so that's the forefront, right? We talk about suicide, but we don't talk about kind of behind the scenes things. And that's, what our field calls it is non-suicide self-injury. But really what it is it's self-injury from cutting, burning, punching tree, anywhere to elicit pain, to take away from pain from another. We'll explain this a little bit later, but so really I have a passion and a desire, and I know you do too, Trevor, of really getting this topic kind of in the mainstream, in the forefront. I'm not sure how it'll turn out. I just feel like I have to be true to the story that I've got inside me and telling it and trying to equip parents to be better caregivers.
Yeah. And if you are just joining us, or if you haven't heard about my story very much, I self-harmed back in 2008 pretty severely, which had its climax with a suicide attempt. And so self-harm is something that's really tender for me. And when I was self-harming back in 2008, the statistics said that 90% of self-harm was non-suicidal. And so you weren't actively trying to kill yourself through self-harm 90% of the time. What's changed is that currently statistics show that 70% of self-harm is non-suicidal.
Yeah, it's interesting as I'm reading and doing my research on this. It's you're right. 70% are non-suicidal in the act, but they're saying that the individuals that are self-harming have a 96% chance of having suicidal ideation. Right. So, I mean, breaking that down, meaning in the act of cutting, burning, punching, whatever that might be.
Whatever form it takes.
It could be even drug use, right? I mean, be promiscuity and, and having a sex with a stranger. I mean, it could be any of these kinds of things, right?
Right.
But but they're saying that the act itself at time, is not suicidal in nature. However, as it progresses, there's a 96% chance that they will have suicidal ideation. And then I think it's like of those 96%, 40 to 50% will attempt.
Yeah.
So it's a pretty big deal. And
so half of individuals who self-harm will attempt,
according to the research, the newest research that I'm studying.
Yeah. Which is always delayed, a couple of years? Yeah.
A year and a half, 2 years. So, it could be lower, it could be higher, but research has to get caught up to where we're at.
And that's a frightening statistic. Anytime it's 50% will whatever, that's an intimidating statistic.
Yeah, it is. And I think that's why I want to write this book, and why I've been given a contract to write this book, is that how do we in some ways demystify what self-injury is, because I think parents will look at it, and I get it. I'm a parent, right? And then parents listening, you see your kid hurting themselves in any form, intentionally, and you're like, oh my goodness, I'm going to jump in and do all these things. And a lot of times the parental protection mechanism is not the right thing to do sometimes, because it's either, what the heck is wrong with you? Why are you doing this thing? Or, I'm going to get you. Going to get to counseling is a good thing, but I'm going to put you in a mental health psych ward, or I'm going to do all these things, and those responses aren't always the most beneficial. And so, as I'm doing and writing this book, it's this practical guide going, how do I not freak out and take care of my kid during this time? And I think it's a very valid conversation to have. And I think, the typical parental response is not bad.
Yeah.
They're wanting to protect their kid, but trying to get down to the root of what's going on, and allowing the kid to, and the adolescent and even the preteen to tell their story.
Yeah. And I think you bring up a really important point, talking about how this book isn't going to be released until maybe April of 19 or whatever it ends up being.
It'll be an ebook to start with, so it'll be a free download, which will be great for anybody that's listening. It's not something that costs you any money, but it most likely would probably hit the download, the website, and the being able to be downloaded in June or July, is what I'm thinking.
Okay, so we've got several months if somebody's listening to this as it's being released. And there's a good chance that somebody who is watching this knows someone who is working with this, of a family member, or a parent of somebody who is self-harming and wants help right now. Can we take just a few minutes and speak directly to that person in the interim?
Well, I think it's great. Like, I've already written kind of my Hair's on Fire crisis chapter, and it's really helping parents go, okay, when you find out that your kid is struggling, whether it be a suicide letter, or you're finding the bloodied blade, or you're finding, drugs in their room, or you're finding whatever it might be that elicits that response of something's not right. Our initial response is that fight, right? Our initial, I'm going to fight my kid, I'm going to fight for my kid, or, my kid's going to get in trouble. And I think, in a lot of ways, you got to take a step back and swallow, take a deep breath, in some ways swallow your pride and go, okay, this is a visual representation of something that's going on inside them. And so I want them to talk.
Yeah.
Right. And that's the big thing, is you want your kid to talk to you. When your kid stops talking to you, that's where it gets really dangerous. But you want your kid to talk. And so, how do you create space for them to develop their voice, tell their story, when you're not going to sit there going, and it's like, okay, so they're in, this is where I think a lot of parents get a struggle is, yes, they're your baby, son, daughter, they're your child, whether firstborn, secondborn, thirdborn, fifthborn, whatever, they're super important to you, and you want the best for them, but you have to remember that they're an individual. They're not a clone of you. They're not, somehow attached to you. And so, yes, you might have desires. Yes, you might have hopes for them. But in that moment, those don't matter as much as the here and now. What's going on? Let me find a way for you to tell your story. Why are you struggling in this way? Without judgment, without trying to fix it at that moment, without trying to assert your opinion or your values on them in that moment. And that is so hard to do as parents.
Yeah.
Because we have an opinion. We want to fix. If it's not something that goes along with our morals or our values, we might have some judgment. And we have to put those aside, because if we don't, then we push our kid farther and farther away, and it becomes a greater issue. And you have to understand, too, that if you can do those things and create that space, over time your child might respond. They're not going to respond right away, especially if they're steeped in this. And there's such a culture of this on social media. There's such a culture of this, in schools where a kid might be struggling with a boyfriend or a parent at home and never even consider self-injury, but a friend's doing it. And so they experiment or try, and then it becomes an effective release. And that's the thing, is it becomes an effective release, whether we get it or not.
It's a valid coping mechanism.
It is.
Whether it's healthy or not is a different question.
Absolutely.
I think that's, and I think it's important to validate too that this is not an easy thing for anyone to go through. The individual who is self-harming,
Right.
the family members around them, the community around them. This is not the way life was meant to be lived.
Right.
And we're struggling through some brokenness, and that it's going to be difficult, as with a lot of the conversations that we've had in the past about race and racism and sex and singleness, and just all of those conversations. They're hard, and they have varying degrees of difficulty, but it's important to just recognize too, like, this is a really crappy moment.
And, I think where parents are wanting, and this is where I'm going to talk to as well, is they go, well, I want to know what the outcome is going to be. And I, as a counselor, as somebody that's experienced suicide ideation and that kind of stuff, I can't tell you that, but I can give you the steps, the practical tools of what to do in the moment. But it really comes down to your child having to come to their senses. And I know you share that story of, when you walked into the house after everything happened and you saw your uncle's face, and it's like, okay, I
Right.
I finally got it for the first time.
Yeah, I was talking to my wife last night who teaches math, talking about there's something with some mental health struggles that we have that is similar to math struggles, where you beat your head against the wall trying to figure out how to do a math equation or how to get a certain type of math thing, and out of nowhere, for no apparent reason, it just clicks and it makes sense. And she as a teacher can see it, from one day to another, the kid's not getting it at all, and suddenly they got it. They're totally great at it. And for me, that was the same experience after my suicide attempt. I came home and I saw my uncle's eyes, and that was the moment of clicking for me, where I realized, like, oh, everything they've been saying, they actually mean. It's not just flat words or whatever. And there's no real good way to explain it. I was in a really strange mindset during that time, and it took that click, and my therapist told my parents, listen, one of the best pieces of advice I could give you is just keep him alive until he grows up. And not saying, this is just a phase, he'll grow out of it. I think that invalidates the experience.
Sure.
But I also needed to grow up a little bit and develop mentally and emotionally to the point where I could find new coping mechanisms.
Well, I think the not being afraid to speak life. Mm-hmm. Right. I think a lot of times when we as parents get into this fight or flight mode of panic or crises, we have a tendency to not speak life. And not intentionally, but we get really caught up in why would you do that? What were you thinking? What's wrong with you? And maybe all those are valid statements,
Sure.
but that's not life-giving.
Yeah.
It's not speaking life. And so really finding ways to speak identity and speak life over your kids. And this is something that, should be happening not in crisis mode.
Right.
This should be happening all the time.
It should be a way of communication and relationship.
Absolutely. I think one of the things that I really encourage parents to do is really, it's exhausting, and there's no two ways about it.
Yeah.
It's going to be exhausting because, one, you love them to death. They're your kids, and you have to keep them alive. Poor choice of words there just a second ago, but that's okay. But you love them. I mean, they're your life. They're part of you. They're they're pride and joy, however you want to look at it. And I mean, I know your parents can attest to this, and I've talked to them numerous times about just how exhausting mentally, emotionally, spiritually that it was. And I think the advice that your counselor gave, just keep them alive, is so valid. And I think there's so many times parents go, I don't know what to do, I don't know where to go, to return. Can I offload my kid someplace, have somebody else take care of them? That's the worst thing you can do, because it tells your kid that I don't know what to do with you, and you're not valuable anymore. However, I get that there's those times, just like with you and your suicide attempt, that like I am not doing a very good job of trying to keep you alive right now. What's the other options? And I've and a hospital stay might be what happens, and you have to pick up the pieces and work through that. But I've had individuals that I've worked with in the past that have, sent their kids away for periods of time, and that's I'm not in the moment, I'm not sitting with them in that decision, so I can't judge it, but I know from an attachment standpoint that can be very damaging.
Well, and I've talked to my parents about this and other therapists, and I was sent to a hospital in town for 11 days, which was way past the 72-hour hold, and part of the reason I had to be there so long was because my parents saw it as an opportunity for therapy, as an opportunity for me to change and grow in the midst of that hospital stay. And what we found out afterwards was that was really the wrong expectation. The expectation should have been, you follow their rules, you do what they say, you get him out as soon as possible. Take this opportunity to prepare for him to come home and get a fresh start, to do things differently. Yep. So that I was safe for those 72 hours. Right. They knew that they could, do what they needed to do in preparation for me to come home. And I think that's something that a lot of parents don't hear. No. And that's not the impression that society as a whole gives to psychiatric hospitals, where I think there's this expectation that it's going to be healing going there.
And for some people it might be. Right? I mean, let's be honest. For some people it might be, but I think in the grand scheme of things, that's where, in this book, right now it's chapter 7, but I'm not sure where it's going to end up, is this, I'm in crisis, my kid just attempted. Yeah. And I take the reader through, or the parent through, step by step. Okay, you have to get them to the hospital. They're going to do an evaluation. Here's the questions they're going to ask. Here's what might happen after that. They might go, okay, is he or she safe to go home? If so, here's what you need to do. Yeah. If not, they're going to send the individual to a psychiatric hospital, and then I take the reader through everything. Here's what they're going to do, what medications they might look, here's what your rights are, here's what questions you should be asking.
That's awesome.
So it takes the reader through all of those things. It's a scary thing.
Totally.
We don't, and this is where I get really frustrated with our societies. We don't talk about these things like we should. A psychiatric hospital is not a 4-letter word. It's there. There's
several more letters.
There's several 4 but there's several. There's a purpose for it. But I think we need to understand what the purpose is and how to utilize it well. Right. And I know, and anybody in our centers here know that therapy is not an 11-day process where the light switch comes on and then all of a sudden you're better. It's a stabilization place that then lays the foundation, or should lay the foundation, for ongoing therapy. And there's some, I'm a big advocate that therapy is not a one-size-fits-all, turn on a switch and you're good. Some people come in for 3 or 4 sessions and they're fine. Others are here for years, and that's okay. Yeah. But to think, and this is where I think I want to encourage parents that are listening, to think that a hospital stay is going to be the thing that flips the switch on for your child. Yeah. It's not.
Right. And I'm really grateful to hear that your book is going to cover that portion of suicidality, because I think that there have been very few resources for those parents to know oh, I have rights over my kid.
Yes.
And this is where I don't have rights over what's happening. And I think that's super important and something that has been lacking. I'm really looking forward to this book being released because I know for the past 10 years of my own recovery, I've seen a really sad lack of information for parents, family members, neighbors, whatever, of individuals who are self-harming or someone who's just struggling with suicidality. And especially in today's culture, statistics show that suicidal thoughts are just on the rise. It's just becoming normal.
I think it's
typical.
43% rise in the last 10 years.
Yeah.
Nationwide.
Which is mind-boggling.
And I might be off by 4 or 5%. It could be 37. But it's mind-boggling. It's that big of a jump in the last 10 years.
Yeah.
And it's not going to be. I want listeners to understand too. It's not going to be a hard read. It's 25,000 words, 100 pages.
Yeah.
I want it to be really practical, cut dry, short, sweet. You can read a chapter and you can take a standalone chapter and go, okay, this chapter's on speaking life. Okay, how do I speak life? This chapter's on what is self-injury. Whatever that might be. And there's actual practical tools of when I find my kid that is self-injuring, how do I work with them and that kind of stuff. So it's not going to be a big read. But I will say for those that are listening, download it. It's a free download. Mm-hmm. It's going to be attached to a website called alive2thrive.com. It's out of Focus on the Family, and it's an upstream curriculum for organizations, churches, counseling, or anything, parents, small groups, schools, to really help figure out how do we create a culture of mental wellness and mental health to help limit suicides. And this is going to be kind of the tip of the spear. But the more downloads we get, the better it's going to be, and the ability to get this message out nationwide is going to be huge.
And the more likely you're going to see a audio version by the author
and a hard copy.
Book.
And a hard copy.
So,
might be good.
Big benefits.
More downloads.
And I will put that link down in the description. The site for Alive to Thrive, the overall curriculum, is live. And we will be making announcements as we get closer to the release date of Dr. Mayfield's book, so that you can stay up to date with that and share that with your friends. And like we said, it's going to be a free resource.
Right.
The whole thing is free.
So why not download it? Why not use it when it doesn't cost you anything? But I think the content is going to be priceless of not just my book, but also the Alive to Thrive website.
Yeah. So. And even if you think that you aren't going to interact with this sort of situation, it's really beneficial to have it just in case, and to have it if one of your friends or somebody close to you is interacting with this as well, to be able to give that support, to know where resources are, rather than being caught flat-footed and not knowing what's going on, which I think has been the case for too many people.
Absolutely. And I think as we change the tide, right, it's going to take families, and organizations, churches, youth groups, whatever it might look like, to kind of change that tide of going, no, we're going to do something different, and we're going to prepare ourselves for if and when, most likely when, it happens.
Yeah. We appreciate you joining us today, and we hope that you will take some time to subscribe, follow us on social media, Candid Conversations with Dr. Mayfield. Most of the time we put it under Candid Conversations, and we would appreciate any feedback that you have. Are you enjoying the show? Do you want certain content for us to talk about? Is there something that you're interested in hearing about that you think maybe we haven't thought about? Because that's possible.
And if you know somebody that's struggling, whether it be your family or somebody that in your circle, in your world, don't hesitate to reach out at candid@mayfieldcounseling.com, and we can get you a list of resources.
Thank you for joining Candid Conversations. If you would like more information, go to mayfieldcounseling.com/candid conversations and check out our Facebook page, Candid Conversations with Dr. Mayfield.